James Mitchell had always been a calm man. The 34-year-old accountant from Manchester rarely raised his voice, let alone his fists. His friends often joked that he was too polite for his own good. But on this particular Tuesday morning in July, something inside him snapped in a way that would make headlines across the world. The day started like any other family vacation day in London. James had planned this trip for months, saving every penny to bring his wife Sarah and their 18-month-old daughter Emma to see the changing of the guard at Buckingham Palace. It was supposed to be magical. Emma loved anything with bright colors and music, and James had promised her she would see real-life soldiers in their red coats and tall black hats. They arrived at the palace gates early, hoping to get a good spot among the growing crowd. The summer heat was already building, and Emma was getting restless in her bright blue stroller. Sarah tried to keep her entertained with snacks and toys, but the toddler was more interested in the bustling crowd around them. As more tourists gathered, the space became tighter. People pushed closer to the gates, everyone wanting the perfect photo or video. James found himself having to constantly move the stroller to avoid people, stepping on it or bumping into Emma. His polite, "Excuse me," requests were often ignored as tourists from around the world jostled for position. The ceremony began with the familiar sound of military music, echoing across the courtyard. Emma's eyes lit up with wonder as she saw the guards in their magnificent uniforms marching in perfect formation. For a moment, James felt his stress melt away as he watched his daughter's pure joy. This was exactly what he had hoped for. But then the crowd surge began. As the guards moved closer to the gates, tourists pressed forward like a wave. James felt the stroller being pushed and pulled in different directions. Someone stepped on his foot while trying to get a better angle for their camera. Another person elbowed past him, nearly knocking Sarah off balance. James tried to protect his family's space, but the crowd seemed to have a mind of its own. A large man with a professional camera pushed right past them, his equipment bag hitting the stroller and making Emma cry. When James politely asked the man to be more careful, he was completely ignored. The heat, the noise, and the constant pushing were making Emma increasingly upset. Her cries grew louder, but in the chaos of the crowd, few people seemed to notice or care. James felt his patience wearing thin as person after person showed no consideration for the fact that they had a small child with them. Then came the moment that changed everything. A royal guard, standing perfectly still at his post near the gate, became the target of countless tourists trying to get reaction photos. People were making faces at him, shouting, and even trying to touch his uniform. The guard, as trained, remained completely motionless and expressionless. James watched in growing frustration as the crowd's behavior became more and more disrespectful. These were professional soldiers doing their job, not entertainment for tourists. But what really set him off was when he saw someone deliberately try to block his view of his own daughter, pushing right in front of the stroller without any acknowledgement. In that moment, 3 hours of building tension, heat, exhaustion, and protective instinct collided. James had reached his breaking point, and what happened next would shock everyone present, including himself. The explosion happened in slow motion. James felt his hands grip the handle of Emma's stroller tighter than ever before. His knuckles turned white as wave after wave of frustration crashed over him. The final straw came when a teenager, completely absorbed in taking selfies, backed directly into the stroller, nearly tipping it over with Emma still inside. "Watch it," James shouted, his voice cutting through the crowd noise for the first time that day. The teenager looked back with an annoyed expression, as if James was the problem, then turned away without a word of apology. Something deep inside James's chest felt like it was about to burst. Years of being the polite one, the one who always stepped aside, the one who never made a scene, suddenly felt like a prison. Here he was, trying to give his daughter a beautiful memory, and these people were treating them like they didn't exist. Sarah noticed the change in her husband immediately. She had never seen that look in his eyes before, a wild, desperate anger that scared her. "James," she said softly, reaching for his arm, "let's just move to a different spot." But James couldn't hear her anymore. The crowd noise, Emma's crying, and the blood rushing in his ears created a storm of sound that drowned out everything else. His vision seemed to narrow until all he could see was the royal guard standing perfectly still, while chaos erupted around him. In James's frustrated mind, the guard became a symbol of everything wrong with the situation. Here was someone who could maintain perfect discipline while everyone else acted like animals. Someone who represented order and respect while tourists showed neither. Someone who stood for something bigger than themselves while others only cared about their photos and videos. The thought that broke his control was simple, but powerful. If everyone else could act however they wanted, why couldn't he? Without warning, James lifted the stroller, with Emma still strapped inside, above his head. The action was so sudden and unexpected that the people immediately around him stepped back in shock. Emma's crying stopped for a moment as she found herself suddenly higher than everyone else, looking down at the sea of surprised faces. "James, no," Sarah screamed, finally understanding what was about to happen. But it was too late. With all the strength that 3 hours of pent-up frustration could provide, James hurled the stroller toward the royal guard. The bright blue stroller sailed through the air in a perfect arc, Emma's toys and snacks spilling out like confetti. The crowd's reaction was immediate and dramatic. Gasps, screams, and shouts erupted from every direction. People scrambled to get out of the way, some falling in their haste to avoid the flying stroller. Cameras that had been focused on the guard suddenly swung toward the chaos James had created. The stroller landed with a loud crash just feet from the royal guard, who, true to his training, didn't even flinch. Emma, still safely strapped in but now upside down, began crying with a volume that could be heard over the entire crowd. For a moment, everything seemed frozen. James stood in the exact spot where he had thrown the stroller, his arms still extended, his face showing a mix of shock and confusion. He looked like a man who had just woken up from a dream and couldn't understand where he was or what he had done. Sarah pushed through the stunned crowd toward her daughter, her face pale with terror and embarrassment. The tourists around them were pulling out phones, some to call for help, others to record what was surely going to become a viral video. Security officers appeared as if from nowhere, moving quickly toward the scene. The royal guard remained perfectly still, but James could see other guards nearby speaking rapidly into their communication devices. In that moment of terrible clarity, James realized that his life had just changed forever. What had started as a family vacation was about to become an international incident, and he was the man responsible for it all. The aftermath was swift and overwhelming. Within seconds of the stroller hitting the ground, palace security guards surrounded James like a closing net. Their movements were professional and precise, each one knowing exactly what to do in this unprecedented situation. Sarah reached Emma first, frantically checking her daughter for injuries while trying to right the overturned stroller. Emma was crying loudly but appeared completely unharmed. The stroller's safety straps had done their job perfectly. The irony wasn't lost on the gathering crowd that the very device James had used as a weapon had also protected his daughter from serious harm. "Sir, I need you to put your hands where I can see them," commanded the lead security officer, a tall man with kind but firm eyes. James complied immediately, the reality of his actions hitting him like a physical blow. His hands shook as he raised them and he could barely form words. "Is she okay? Is my daughter okay?" James asked, his voice cracking with emotion. The anger that had consumed him moments before had vanished completely, replaced by pure terror at what he had done. The crowd around them had grown larger, with people pushing closer to see what was happening. Phones were held high in the air, recording every moment. James could hear whispered conversations in multiple languages as tourists tried to explain to each other what they had just witnessed. "She appears to be fine, sir," the security officer replied, glancing toward Sarah and Emma. "But we need to sort this situation out immediately." The royal guard who had been the target of James's outburst remained at his post, as unmoved as a statue. His training had prepared him for many things, but a flying stroller was probably not one of them. Yet he showed no emotion, no reaction, no sign that anything unusual had happened at all. James found himself both admiring and hating that composure. Part of him wished he could have that same self-control, while another part of him was frustrated that his dramatic gesture had seemingly bounced off the guard like rain off a window. "I'm sorry," James said to everyone and no one in particular. "I'm so sorry. I don't know what came over me. I've never done anything like this before in my life." Sarah approached with Emma in her arms, her face a mixture of relief that her daughter was safe and mortification at her husband's behavior. "James, what were you thinking?" she whispered urgently. "This isn't like you at all." The security team was already coordinating with local police who arrived within minutes. The efficiency of their response was impressive, but also terrifying to James, who had never been in trouble with the law before. He thought about his job, his reputation, his family's future, and felt sick to his stomach. One of the officers began taking statements from witnesses, while another approached James with a serious expression. "Sir, I'm going to need you to come with us." Throwing objects at royal property is a serious offense regardless of your intentions. As James was led away, he could hear the crowd buzzing with excitement and disbelief. Some tourists were already uploading videos to social media. Others were calling friends and family to tell them about the incredible scene they had just witnessed. The changing of the guard ceremony, meanwhile, continued as if nothing had happened. The other guards maintained their positions and routines, demonstrating the same unwavering professionalism that had somehow triggered James's breakdown in the first place. Emma's cries gradually subsided as Sarah bounced her gently, but the damage was done. What should have been a cherished family memory had become a nightmare that would follow them for months, if not years, to come. As James was escorted away from Buckingham Palace, he caught one last glimpse of the royal guard who had been his target. The man stood perfectly still, completely unaffected by the chaos that had erupted around him. In that moment, James realized that the guard's composure wasn't what had angered him. It was exactly what he had needed to learn from all along. The police station was nothing like James had imagined from television shows. It was quieter, more bureaucratic, and filled with the kind of fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly ill. As he sat in the holding area, still processing what had happened, James couldn't shake the feeling that he was living someone else's life. The arresting officer, Constable Williams, was surprisingly kind. He had children of his own and seemed to understand how overwhelming a family vacation could become. "I've seen good people do stupid things under pressure," he told James as they completed the paperwork. "The question now is what you're going to do about it." Meanwhile, Sarah sat in the station's waiting area with Emma, who had finally fallen asleep in her mother's arms. The stroller, slightly dented but still functional, sat nearby as evidence of the morning's events. Sarah kept replaying the incident in her mind, trying to understand how her mild-mannered husband had transformed into someone she didn't recognize. The story was already spreading beyond the walls of the police station. A tourist from Germany had captured the entire incident on video, and within hours it was being shared across social media platforms worldwide. The headlines were already being written. "Tourist throws baby stroller at Royal Guard," "Father's meltdown at Buckingham Palace," and "When vacation goes wrong." James's phone, which had been returned to him temporarily, buzzed constantly with notifications. Friends from home were sending him links to news articles about his own actions. His boss from the accounting firm had called 3 times. His mother had left a voicemail that simply said, "James, please call me. I'm seeing very strange things on the internet." The media attention was unlike anything James could have prepared for. Television news crews were already gathering outside the police station, and reporters were calling the station directly asking for information about the stroller incident. What had started as a moment of personal frustration had become international news. "The thing is," Constable Williams explained as they sat across from each other in a small interview room, "technically you could be charged with several different offenses. Disturbing the peace, endangering a child, threatening behavior toward royal personnel, but I think everyone involved understands this wasn't a planned attack." James felt a wave of relief, followed immediately by another wave of shame. The officer was being reasonable, but James knew he didn't deserve such consideration. "I've never done anything like this before," he repeated for what felt like the 100th time. "I'm not a violent person. I don't even argue with people at work." "What happened out there?" Williams asked gently. "Help me understand how someone like you ends up throwing a stroller at one of the Queen's guards." James struggled to put his feelings into words. How could he explain that years of being polite and accommodating had somehow built up pressure inside him? How could he describe the moment when watching other people's rudeness became unbearable? How could he make anyone understand that seeing his daughter crying while strangers pushed past them had triggered something primal and protective? "I think," James said slowly, "I got tired of being invisible. Tired of everyone else acting like we didn't matter. And when I saw that guard standing there, so perfectly in control while everything around him was chaos, I guess I wanted to shake that control. I wanted someone to react to me." Williams nodded thoughtfully. He had dealt with enough domestic disturbances and public outbursts to recognize the signs of someone who had simply reached their breaking point. The good news is that no one was seriously hurt, including your daughter. The guard is fine. The stroller is mostly intact, and while this is embarrassing, it's not the end of the world. But even as William spoke, James knew that this incident would follow him for a long time. In the age of social media and viral videos, people didn't forget moments like this. His face would be recognizable to strangers. His name would be associated with this story, and his family would have to live with the consequences of his few seconds of lost control. Sarah appeared in the doorway of the interview room, Emma still sleeping peacefully in her arms.
"They said I could see you now," she said quietly.
Her eyes were red from crying, but her voice was steady. "Sarah, I'm so sorry," James began, but she held up a hand to stop him. "We'll talk about this later," she said. "Right now I just need to know what happens next. Can we go home? Can we put this behind us? Can our family survive this?" Looking at his wife and daughter, James realized that those were the only questions that really mattered. The journey home to Manchester felt like the longest train ride of James's life. He and Sarah sat in uncomfortable silence while Emma played with her toys, blissfully unaware that her father had become an internet sensation for all the wrong reasons. Every time someone looked in their direction, James wondered if they recognized him from the videos that were now circulating worldwide. By the time they reached home, the story had taken on a life of its own. News outlets were running segments about tourist behavior at royal sites. Social media was filled with memes featuring James's shocked expression after throwing the stroller. Late-night comedians were already writing jokes about the incident. The phone calls started immediately. James's boss at the accounting firm was understanding, but concerned about the company's reputation. "Take some time off," he suggested.
"Let this blow over before you come back to the office." Sarah's mother called from Scotland, having seen the story on the evening news.
"I always said that boy was too quiet," she told Sarah. "Still waters run deep, don't they?" But it was the call from James's own mother that hit hardest.
"I raised you better than this," she said, her voice heavy with disappointment.
"What will people think? What will the neighbors say?" James tried to explain, but the words sounded hollow even to himself. How could he make anyone understand that he wasn't proud of what he had done, but that in some strange way it had felt necessary in the moment? The real shock came when they discovered that the video had been viewed millions of times across various platforms. Comments ranged from sympathetic, "I feel for this dad, crowds are horrible with kids," to harsh, "What kind of father uses his baby as a weapon?" to completely absurd, "This is why Americans shouldn't visit England," and despite James being British. Emma's nursery school called the next day. Several parents had expressed concern about having their children around someone who had shown such volatile behavior. While the school director was diplomatic, the message was clear. James's actions were affecting more than just his own family. The media attention brought unexpected consequences. A newspaper reporter knocked on their door, wanting to interview James about his moment of madness. When James refused to talk, the reporter interviewed neighbors instead, trying to piece together a profile of the man who had shocked the world. "He seemed like such a normal bloke," their next-door neighbor told the reporter. "Always polite, always kept to himself. You just never know what's going on inside someone's head, do you?" Sarah found herself defending her husband to friends and family, even though she was still processing her own feelings about what had happened. "He's not violent," she insisted to anyone who would listen. "He's never even raised his voice at Emma." Something just snapped. The psychological toll was becoming evident. James barely slept, replaying the incident over and over in his mind. He found himself analyzing every interaction he had with strangers, wondering if they recognized him. Going to the grocery store became an ordeal. Taking Emma to the park felt impossible. A week after the incident, something unexpected happened. James received an email from someone calling himself Sergeant David Richardson, claiming to be the Royal Guard who had been on duty that day. The email was brief and formal. "Mr. Mitchell, I hope this message finds you and your family well. I wanted you to know that no harm was done, and I harbor no ill will toward you. We all have difficult days. Perhaps we could meet for a conversation when you're ready. Sometimes talking helps more than you might expect." James stared at the email for an hour before showing it to Sarah. "Do you think it's real?" she asked. "I don't know," James replied, "but maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe I need to hear what he has to say." The idea of facing the man he had targeted with his outburst was terrifying, but James realized it might be the only way to truly move forward. The guard had shown perfect composure during the incident, but what was he really thinking? How had it affected him? As James considered whether to respond to the email, he began to understand that his moment of lost control had created ripples that extended far beyond his own family. The guard, the tourists who witnessed it, the security officers who responded, the police who processed him, everyone had been touched by his actions in some way. The question now was whether James had the courage to face the full consequences of what he had done, starting with the man who had been the target of his frustration. 2 weeks after the incident, James found himself sitting in a quiet cafe in central London, nervously checking his watch every few minutes. He had agreed to meet Sergeant David Richardson, and the anticipation was almost unbearable. Sarah had offered to come with him, but James knew this was something he needed to face alone. When Richardson walked through the cafe door, James recognized him immediately, even in civilian clothes. The same composed bearing, the same steady presence that had somehow triggered James's outburst at the palace. But without the uniform and ceremonial setting, he looked remarkably ordinary, just a man in his 30s with kind eyes and a slight smile. "Mr. Mitchell?" Richardson extended his hand as he approached the table. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." James shook the offered hand, surprised by how normal the interaction felt. "I wasn't sure you were real," he admitted. "I thought it might be a journalist trying to trick me into another story." Richardson laughed, a warm sound that immediately put James more at ease. "I can understand that. You've had quite a media storm, haven't you?" As they settled into conversation over coffee, James discovered that David Richardson was nothing like the stoic, emotionless figure he had imagined. The guard was articulate, thoughtful, and surprisingly understanding about what had happened. "The thing people don't realize about ceremonial duties," Richardson explained, "is that we see everything. We're trained not to react, but we're very aware of what's happening around us. I saw your family struggling in that crowd long before the incident occurred." James felt a flush of embarrassment. "You saw me losing control. I saw a father trying to protect his family in a difficult situation," Richardson corrected gently. "I've been doing this job for 8 years and I've seen it all. Parents with crying children, tourists behaving badly, people trying to get reactions from us. Most of the time, people find ways to cope. Sometimes they don't." The conversation revealed something James hadn't expected. Richardson had actually been impressed by James's dedication to his family. "You stood there for 3 hours in that heat, constantly adjusting the stroller, trying to give your daughter a good experience despite everything going wrong. That's not the behavior of a bad father. But I threw a stroller, with my daughter in it." James's voice was heavy with shame. "Yes, you did," Richardson acknowledged, "and that was wrong. But in 8 years of ceremonial duty, do you know how many people have tried to get a reaction from me? Thousands. They've shouted, made faces, even tried to touch me. You're the first one who apologized." This revelation stunned James. In his mind, he had become the worst kind of tourist, the cautionary tale that others would reference. Learning that his behavior was unusual not because it was so terrible, but because he had shown remorse, shifted his perspective entirely. Richardson went on to explain that the incident had actually led to some positive changes. Palace security had reviewed crowd management procedures, particularly around ceremonies involving large numbers of tourists with children. New barriers had been installed to create better viewing areas, and additional staff had been assigned during peak tourist seasons. "In a strange way," Richardson said, "your moment of frustration highlighted problems that needed addressing. Obviously, there were better ways to bring attention to those issues, but sometimes change comes from unexpected places." As their conversation continued, James learned that Richardson had his own family, a wife and 2 young sons. He understood the pressures of parenting, the exhaustion of family outings, the protective instincts that could sometimes overwhelm rational thought. "I don't excuse what you did," Richardson made clear, "but I understand it, and I wanted you to know that carrying this guilt forever won't help anyone, especially your daughter." Before they parted, Richardson made an unexpected request. "Would you consider doing something positive with all this attention? Maybe talking to parent groups about managing stress or supporting charities that help families. Turn this negative moment into something that helps others." The idea had never occurred to James, but as he walked home from the cafe, it began to make sense. The story was already out there, his face was already known. Instead of hiding from the attention, perhaps he could use it to make a difference. 3 months later, James gave his first interview to a parenting magazine, not about the incident itself, but about the importance of recognizing when stress is overwhelming your judgment. He began volunteering with a local family support charity, helping other parents navigate difficult situations. The viral video of his outburst still existed online, and probably always would. But gradually, it became just one part of a larger story about redemption, understanding, and the unexpected connections that can form between people in the aftermath of a crisis. Emma, now walking and talking more each day, would never remember the incident at Buckingham Palace. But she would grow up with a father who had learned valuable lessons about self-control, the power of apology, and the importance of turning mistakes into opportunities for growth. The royal guard who had stood perfectly still while chaos erupted around him had taught James that true strength sometimes comes not from reacting, but from choosing how to respond after the storm has passed.